This is a regular call meeting of the Hollister Planning Commission on August 22nd, 2024. This meeting is now called into order. It is 6:01 p.m. Staff, please call the roll.
Thank you, Commissioner Corona,
Present.
Commissioner Aguilas,
Present.
Vice Chair Long,
Present.
and one note for the record by Commissioner Mazzini.
Commissioner Corona, can you please lead us in the play?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we move on to this is time for anyone in the audience to speak on any item not on the agenda, within the subject matter of jurisdiction of the commission. Speaker cards are available in the lobby and are to be completed and given to staff before speaking. When staff calls your name, please come to the podium, state your name and city for the records, and speak to the commission. If you are joining us via Zoom, please click on the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. If you are joining us via Zoom using a cell phone, please press 9. Each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes with a maximum of 30 minutes per subject. Please note the state law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on any items not on the agenda. Staff, do we have any public comments?
We do not have any public comment.
Any? Do I need to throw that out?
No.
I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the planning commission regular meeting held on 7/2024. I'll make the motion to approve the minutes. Second. Do we have any questions from the commission? Hearing none, I have a motion in a second. Do we do a roll call? Or can we do it?
We can just vote, you know, if you vote then.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed? Hearing none. Move on. I'm sorry, motion carried. Move on to item number 6, the amendments of the planning bylaws.
Great, thank you. This item before you tonight is a proposed update to our planning commission's bylaws. The staff is recommending. Staff is recommending a few changes, relatively minor, and one change to our processes for how the public hearing will move forward. So we are recommending that the planning commission update the time and place of the regular meetings to include an optional study session on the second Thursday of each month. We have been having these study sessions occasionally. As some of the planning commission is aware, we have been working slowly but surely on a zoning amendment overhaul in conjunction with our general plan update. And we had some study sessions scheduled for the second Thursday. This amendment is mostly for noticing purposes. So instead of them being noticed as special meetings, which is a different time frame for posting the agendas, this change would allow us to notice them as regular meetings if and when we needed to have them occur. The second recommendation that we are making is to remove the verification of agenda posting from the actual agenda order. The agenda verification will be published in the agenda, but this is in line with changes that the council is making for efficiency of the meeting. It's a minor efficiency change, but we're recommending to follow the council's order of their agenda changes as well. We are also recommending updating the bylaws to reflect the consent agenda. As you may be aware, tonight we're using eScribe, our new agenda software, for the first time. And we are proposing to have a consent agenda for the planning commission. And we can put minutes approvals on there, but also if in the future we ever have any kind of standard business that doesn't require a full public hearing or anything like that, that would might be an uncommon case, but the consent agenda would allow us to place items on there for the planning commission, and instead of individually having to vote on each item on the consent agenda, the planning commission can make one motion on the whole agenda and adopt every item and vote on every item all at once. And then we are also, and this is probably the most quote unquote significant change, we're recommending amending the bylaws to allow for a presentation by the applicant or the appellant. We often have applicants who would like more than the current, but we allow 3 minutes to speak to the commission, and the commission often has questions for the applicant. And so we'd like to put in the bylaws an opportunity for the applicant to formally present their item at the beginning of the public hearing if they wish, but also an unlimited amount of time for the commission to directly ask the applicant or the appellant or other project components questions before the rest of the public testimony happens. And then in that public testimony, the applicant would then have an opportunity to get another 3 minutes to rebut any public comment before the public hearing is closed. So we're recommending a modification to the structure of our public hearing to formally give that presentation and question time. Because staff gets a presentation and question period with the planning commission, but because of public hearing rules, it's been relatively limited for the commission to have direct questions to the applicant. So we're recommending this change. And that's something that's pretty common in a lot of other jurisdictions about commissions or design committees. And then finally, we're just updating a few language changes for clarity and modernization. And that is basically all of the changes. I'm happy to answer any questions about anything individually. But the planning commission tonight has a few options. One would be to adopt a resolution recommending approval of the changes as proposed to the city council. The city council ultimately will approve the bylaws. The planning commission could recommend approval with any changes to the bylaws that you suggest. You could adopt a resolution recommending the denial of the bylaws to the committee or to the city council, or you could continue the hearing and direct staff to provide additional information or clarification. And tonight we are recommending option 1. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the commission? Can we go back a slide? I just have a question. So when it comes to amendments to the bylaws, is there like a standard time? Like, I would change every 5 years, 3 years.
In my experience, they haven't been changed on a consistent basis. They haven't had an update period. They were last updated, I believe, in 2019, and that was a change. It was, I think what the amendment was in 2019 that was needed to be made. Oh, it had to do with the council's appointment of planning commissioners, and we had made a change to allow council to appoint a commissioner from a district that they are not a part of if there were no applications in their district. So that was the last time that the planning commission bylaws were changed in any way, and it's the only time that they've been changed in my time here with the city. I don't know when the time before or when they were adopted initially was.
If somebody from the commission wanted to make change to the bylaws, that just a request to staff or.
Yes, the commission could request to make a change. I believe we could get direction from a majority of the commission to bring a discussion item back. Tonight we are talking about the bylaws, so we can talk about any changes tonight, but if in the future at another time a commissioner wanted to make a recommendation of a change or we could do that, and then it would be brought before the commission to make a recommendation on the language to the council and that's it.
So the, but for the changes, it looks like most of the changes are to expedite the meetings, or like, streamline, I guess. That's all I have. Staff, do we have any public comments?
No public comments.
This would be a motion made to cover all changes with one motion. We need a PC number.
Yes, so the resolution number, I'm just checking the minutes, it should be 2024-10 would be the next.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make a resolution. Let's see, planning commission resolution number 2024-10. The resolution of the planning commission of the city of Oxford recommend city council approve amendments to the planning commission bylaws. And Billy to list them off.
That's good.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Second.
I'll second.
Motion and second. And all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. So, the opposition, the motion carries 3-0. We'll move on to item number 2, the legislative update. Maybe that's staff report.
Thank you, Vice Chair, Planning Commissioners, I'm just going to take a moment. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be presenting on 2 items, and this is largely because there are new planning commissioners, so we'll be talking about the Brown Act, and then also some housing law basics. So again, I'll be talking first about the Brown Act, just a high-level overview of what the Brown Act is and how it applies to planning commissioners. And then I'll also be talking about, again, some high-level housing law, because it's a pretty important topic for planning commissioners to be aware of. So I'll be talking about the Housing Accountability Act, the Permit Streamlining Act, talk about density bonus law, accessory dwelling unit, a little bit about HCD, just who they are. And then the housing element, arena, and then last I'll talk about Senate Bill 9. And I'll just point out here at the beginning that these are some of the housing laws. There are many, many, many more. And you're not really expected to memorize these. Anytime that you need to know a law when you're considering a project, staff will make sure that you're aware of it. But starting with the Brown Act. This is going to be hopefully a reminder for those of you that have been on the planning commission or have held an elected or appointed role in the past, but it's always been a refresher. So the Brown Act is also known as the Open Meetings Law, and it's been in California law since 1964. And really the high level purpose of the act is to ensure that the public has right to access concerning the conduct of the people's business. And it requires several things, which I'll list here, but then I'll go into more detail on the following slide. The first thing that the Brown Act requires is that all board action and deliberation, meaning discussions, be taken openly and in public. Also, board meetings All board meetings must be public except for when a closed session applies. Planning commission will probably never have to enter into closed session, but just something to be aware of. Meeting agendas and packets need to be available prior to the meetings at, usually 72 hours in advance for a regular meeting, but 24 hours in advance for a special meeting. And those agenda packets need to be available, both posted somewhere in public, so you'll see outside City Hall, there's a kiosk, I guess we call it, where agendas are posted, but also on, if the city has a website, on the website as well. And it needs to be made available in formats that are available for people with disabilities. And then the last really important part of the Brown Act is that the public has a right to attend meetings, and they also have a right to address the board. So when you call for public comment, that's what we're doing. And they are entitled to address the board on items within their jurisdiction, their subject matter jurisdiction. So who is subject to the Brown Act? Largely it's governing bodies, so like the city council, subcommittees and commissions like yourselves, and then there's certain private entities that when they're created by a legislative body and funded by the local agency that could potentially be subject to the Brown Act, but I won't get into that. That's what we're really interested in is the planning commission. So the planning commission, because it was formed by the city council, as a body, it's subject to the Brown Act. So for that reason, we are subject to the Brown Act. So what is a meeting? We think we know what a meeting is, but under the Brown Act, there's some ambiguity and also some nuances. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So the definition in the law is that a meeting is any congregation of a majority of members at the same time and location to hear, discuss, or deliberate on any item within the public agency's jurisdiction. This has been very broadly defined though. So for example, you see the law says in the same time and location. That's kind of misleading because courts have also determined that you can have a meeting via electronic means, so like email, text, which I'll talk about a little bit more, but you don't really have to be in the same place and location to have a meeting. It's important to know when you're having a meeting because again, all meetings of the planning commission need to be held in public, so that the public can attend and comment. So if you're having a meeting outside of that, those circumstances, that would be a violation of the Brown Act. So again, meetings could include the use of direct communications, just talking face to face, intermediaries, so talking with other people who then relate to the information to other commissioners. It could be through technological devices like email. Anytime that a majority of the members of the body of the planning commission, so 3 out of 5, or actually even 4, anytime a majority of you are discussing the matter within your jurisdiction, that would be considered. So there are several things in the law that are carved out that are specifically not meetings. So for example, two planning commissioners could talk to one another, as long as it doesn't involve a third, so as long as it's last name majority. You, as planning commissioners, could all attend the same public conference. So, for example, the Cal State's Planning Commissioners Conference, 3 or more of you could all attend that conference, and at that conference, they'll be discussing planning issues. But it's carved out in the law that that will not be considered a meeting. I would just caution you not to discuss policy planning issues. You can also attend other local agency meetings. So if you wanted to go to the city council meeting or the board of supervisors meeting, something like that, that's permitted. Community meetings. So those are, I always think of the example of the PSPS meetings, but I mean, it could be anything similar, some sort of a public or community meeting. You could all attend that. Social gatherings, staff meetings, and then also, this may have already happened, or this may happen soon in the future, but you can use planning staff or city staff can reach out to the entire commission to check their availability for an upcoming meeting. So that's something that's not permission. So again, I will just highlight or emphasize that although these are all carved out as not considered to be under the Brown Act, it's still not be permitted to discuss Hollister specific issues, planning issues while you're together. So I think I alluded to this a little bit, but in the law, there's also something called a serial meeting. So this, I'll just read the definition. A serial meeting is a series of communications, each of which involves less than a quorum of the legislative body, but which taken as a whole involves the majority of the body's members. And this definition is from the Attorney General and that person's particular interpretation of the Brown Act. But basically what that means is that you could even have a meeting if you never directly talk to one another, you never directly communicate with one another. And that happens in, we see it happen in two different ways, either through what we call a chain link meeting or a hub and spoke. And those are demonstrated on this slide. So you can see, for example, a chain link meeting would be one planning commissioner speaking to, so planning commissioner A, communicating to planning commissioner B, who then communicates to planning commissioner C. And you've essentially created a meeting through a chain of communication. And as long as, if you're talking about planning commission business and you're communicating with your thoughts or opinions on those issues, that would be considered a meeting of the Brown Act. And doing that outside of a public meeting would be inside of the Brown Act. And then similarly, a hub and spoke meeting operates in a similar way, except there's one person in the center who's communicating outward. So one planning commissioner who speaks to planning commissioner B, C, D, and communicates about the same issue. That could essentially create a meeting. At the end of the communications, 3 or more planning commissioners have discussed an issue. And that hub doesn't have to be a planning commissioner. Sometimes it can be staff. So like the city attorney, the city manager, planning staff, who could essentially play that role. So that's why it's important for staff to want to down too, so they can spot when these things might be occurring. And again, these things can happen through email, telephone, text, direct message, social media. I'll talk a little bit more about social media because there's a little bit of a there's a different nuance there. But one thing we do caution is, for example, if you do receive an email to all of the commission, we would caution against replying all, because that then creates a communication between all of the commissioners. So you may get an email from myself, that would be rare, but good, or even sending it to everyone. When you reply back, we recommend and prefer that you reply, just reply.
And I would just add here that the staff will, usually when we're emailing the whole commission, will blind copy you all on the emails to help avoid a reply all.
And I mentioned social media. This is just a little different because all of the discussions I've had, everything I've said so far has been about a majority of commissioners discussing things within the planning commission's jurisdiction. On social media, there was a new law passed in 2020 that defines discuss among themselves a little bit differently, in that it says that even one commissioner shouldn't comment or make a like or post an emoji or anything on another commissioner's post. So even just one comment, although that only involves 2 commissioners, would be a violation of the Brown Act. And I don't know the reasoning for that. It's my guess would be that, well, 2 people have posted, but all the others can still see it. So it kind of involved, it could potentially involve more. So that's just something to caution when you are on social media to, you're welcome to post about your planning role. You can share, see posts, do all these things, but just avoid commenting on each other's posts or even liking each other's posts or, things different. And again, I think I already talked about this, but there are times when city staff will provide information to the entire commission, and either said they will typically blind copies or do unintentionally reply all, and it will go back to everybody. But planning commissioners also can send information, one-way information to the rest of the commission. I just caution you to be really careful because you can provide information, so like if you wanted to, if you went to the planning commission conference, the Cal Cities Planning Commissioners Conference, and you got a really cool white paper there that you wanted to share with the commission, we would be trying to email it out to everybody, but we would ask that you don't use it to express any opinion of your own, especially if it's on an issue that might come in for you. So it's really just a one-way transmission of factual information, is permitted. I think it's kind of a delicate issue that. In fact, if you, one way to avoid that would be, did get such a paper or something, you wanted to share, you might send it to staff. So again, I talked about reply all, and also social media, so this is just some common pitfalls when you can create unintentionally create a meeting on the ground. And then when committees and commissions meet, so you can have every commission has regularly scheduled regular meetings. So in fact, you just amend your bylaws or recommend your bylaws to include 2 regular meetings per month instead of just the one. And what that does is it makes it a regular rather than special meeting. You previously adopted that schedule. And so those regular meetings require a 72-hour notice, posting of the agenda, so 72 hours prior to the meeting, the agenda needs to be posted. And then if there were ever a special meeting, which I think occurs on occasion, the requirement is that that be posted 24 hours. The commission is required to meet within the boundary of the local agency, so somewhere within Hollister, Spartan, and we will always meet here. There are some exceptions I won't really get into because they largely apply to city councils where some of their members can attend remotely, but that option is not available to. And then again, the agenda for a meeting must be posted in advance, and it needs to provide a description of each item on the agenda. So somebody looking at the agenda needs to know what will be discussed in the meeting, so they know if they want to show up in the report and listen to the discussion. So that description is basically fair notice of the business that will be considered. It has to be more than clues of what will be discussed. So someone needs to not have to guess what we'll discuss. It needs to be clear enough to know in particular. Something that's unique, well, actually just like for example too, but a decision regarding CEQA needs to be listed as a separate action item on the agenda. So you may see this come up where if you're having to certify an EIR, or something like that, and you will decide that separately from a particular project, even if that's related to the project. And then the agenda package needs to be made available to all of the members at the same time. So I believe you all receive the link by email, so you all at the same time with the meeting. And then there are some exceptions to the agenda requirements that are listed on this slide, but for the most part, you won't need to really worry about the first 3. Those are ones that that staff or myself will take care of and get it first. If there's an emergency situation or held over item, anything like that, we'll make sure that the agenda is correctly and handled the meeting correctly. But the last one, in response to public comments and announcement, you do on your agenda have a time and meeting for planning commissioner comment and staff comment. And it isn't specific as to what you'll speak about, but that is allowed in the ground. You have an opportunity to freeform speak about things as long as the commission doesn't engage in discussion on the meeting. And then again, the Brown Act requires that the public be given an opportunity to comment on anything that's on the agenda, and that's for both regular and special meetings. And at regular meetings, there has to be an opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. And the one thing I did want to emphasize is that the planning commission meeting is a meeting of the commission in public. It's not a public meeting. And what I mean by that is that you're here to conduct your own business that's on your agenda, and the public is permitted to comment But it isn't necessarily a back and forth or a communication with the public, they're just here to state their opinion or what they want to say. And you will consider what they say, but they don't have to be involved. So that's why we typically caution that you don't have a lot of back and forth or any back and forth with the people, going to people. Just a couple of things about public comments, the planning commission currently gives the public each 3 minutes to speak on each item. The chair does have the discretion to increase or decrease that amount of time. But if they do that, they need to give every speaker on the item the same amount of time. If you ever do have a speaker who requires the use of a translator, you need to let them double the amount of time that you would give someone who's just making their own comment. The media and the public are allowed to record and broadcast your meetings, unless that is causing some sort of disruption of the meeting, in which case they can be asked to stop. And the same thing with people who, we haven't had this issue here, but if there are members of the public or a group in the chambers that are disrupting the meeting, we can give them a warning, we can remove someone who's being disruptive. It's a careful, we have to be very careful that we're removing them for disrupting and not for what they're saying, because people in the chambers and public commenters have the right to speak their mind. It's a First Amendment right. But if they are actually disrupting the meeting, so you can't conduct your business, they can be removed after a warning. I would assist you with that if it ever happens. So far, and then again, it's best practice to, if you are going to respond to public comments, to do so briefly, or if someone on the or at the podium has a question, if you could direct staff to briefly answer that question. But typically we don't recommend that you open a dialogue. And then lastly, anything distributed to you in writing at the meeting, or anyone who is making public comment, bringing a document for the planning commission, those documents will be distributed equally to all commissioners and will become a part of the meeting minutes. With that, I'm happy to answer the questions you have about the Brown Act. Move on to housing. So, as I mentioned, there are many housing laws in the state of California, and really the reason for this is the state legislature has determined that California has a housing crisis, because there's an overall shortage of housing stock. So most of the laws that have been passed over the years have been aimed at reducing barriers to building homes. And as I mentioned, the purpose of this presentation is really just to give you an overall awareness of some of these laws. If you ever need to know any of these when you're considering a project, staff will make sure that you're aware of those. So I'm going to start off with the Housing Accountability Act. Housing Accountability is a mouthful. The Housing Accountability Act, I might just call it the HAA, requires local government to process housing development project applications in conformance with specific procedures and to make specified findings if they're going to deny a housing development project or reduce the density of a housing development project. This law was enacted in 1982, and ever since it's been continually expanded. The housing development project does have a specific definition under the HAA. And basically, it's something that consists of all residential units or mixed use, which consists of both residential and non-residential, where at least 2/3 of the square footage is residential, or certain specialized types of defined types of housing, transitional or supportive housing. There are additional protections, so that's just market rate regular housing projects, but there are even more protections under the law for affordable housing projects. And to qualify for those additional protections, the project needs to include some percentage or some amount of very low or moderate income housing. So the city can, although there are these protections for housing projects under the law, the city still can require housing projects to comply with objective, quantifiable, written development standards. And they can also condition projects and require projects to comply with city policy. But in order to do that, those conditions and policies and standards, they need to be appropriate and consistent with meeting the city's regional housing needs allocation, which I will talk about later when we talk about housing ordinance. They need to be applied to facilitate and accommodate development after the city that's permitted on the site. And then the definition of the standards need to be objective, and what objective means is that there is no personal or subjective judgment being. So the standards need to be uniformly applied, and they need to be based on some external benchmark or criteria available, so that whoever's submitting their application, they're going to advance what reasons are allowed under the law. So that's the reason why it's really important for the cities to adopt and codify the objective standards, and so that they are able to apply those to projects. If they're not adopted in advance, then they're not allowed to apply. The city can impose fees on projects. So the most common, well, inspection fees, but impact fees, all those different fees that you're about, the HA does not prohibit or severe other agencies from applying to this project. And again, they can condition projects as long as those conditions don't act to lower the density of the project, or if it's an affordable housing project, you need to ensure that those conditions don't somehow make the project no longer affordable to build. So one example would be if the city objective standards requires particular materials to be used, and those materials, if used, would no longer make the affordable housing project financially feasible, that may not be allowable. And then there are particular findings, and if the city though did want to deny a housing project, there are certain standards or certain findings that would have to be made, and just one of these findings on this slide would have to be made. So either the city's housing element is substantially compliant with housing element law, and the city has met or exceeded its RENA in all income categories proposed in the housing development. If that's the case, would deny a housing project. This is very rare. There are very few cities or agencies in the state that have a valid adopted housing element and have met or exceeded their RENA. But there's a few. A project could be denied if the housing development would have a specific adverse impact upon public health or safety, and there's no feasible method to mitigate or avoid that impact without rendering the housing development project unaffordable or financially feasible. The project can be denied if that project is required to comply with some specific state or federal law, and there's no feasible method to comply with that without rendering the development unaffordable. And then if the housing development is proposed on certain types of land, so agriculture, if it's surrounded on two sides by that are currently used for agriculture or resource preservation, or if there's no adequate water or wastewater facilities for the project. And then lastly, a housing project could be denied if it's inconsistent with the city's zoning ordinance and general plan land use designation, and the city has an adopted housing element substantially compliant with housing element law. So this is one you may have to read. You may see it in the movie, but this is one you might see. If a proponent, a project proponent proposes a project that just doesn't comply with the city's zoning ordinance and general plan, then it could be denied. And if the city hasn't adopted housing plan. There are consequences for violating that HAA, so courts have primary authority over this. And action can be brought by an eligible plaintiff. So if you deny a project that doesn't, and you haven't been able to make one of these findings, the project proponent can sue the city because they shouldn't estimate the project. HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development. They also have some authority to enforce violations of the HAA, and they do that by notifying the Attorney General, who would then essentially choose whether or not they want to prosecute the city for violating the HAA. So that's that. The Permit Streamlining Act, this was enacted in 1977, and this one is, it more serves as a time clock, so it gives particular timing as to when a project application needs to be reviewed and processed. And really the purpose is to expedite development project decisions, and to provide clarity to the applicants so that they know in advance what the specific requirements are to have their project approved. If the city fails to, if they fail to meet the timeline, the project could potentially be deemed approved by right. So meaning it's just approved without having to go through the city's approval process. There are some caveats to that. Typically, the project proponent would have had to do any kind of public notification that would have been required for the project before it would be deemed approved, but essentially it would be deemed approved. And then there's some specific types of applications in law that this PSA with permission to streamline that does not apply to. And then the last part of this is that the city needs to compile and maintain a list specifying the types of information that are needed from the project applicant. So, and those lists need to be made available to all applicants or anything who requests them. So again, so they know in advance what they need to submit in the final particular. This is just a high level overview of the steps to approve or disapprove a project. First, when an application is submitted, the city needs to determine whether or not it's complete. So, you know, the application will be submitted, but it may be missing critical information. So the city has 30 days to make that determination. If it is deemed complete, the city determines whether or not there's what kind of public hearing or public notification requirements there are for that particular application. And then the city has 30 days to determine whether or not, once they've determined the application is complete, they have 30 days to determine whether or not, or what type of environmental review, if any, is required for the project. So whether it's EIR, any declaration, whether it's a fence, or whatever it may be. And then they process the application. And there are time limits in the permit streamlining to actually process the application. Once the application is returned to complete, and those timelines vary. And then I will talk briefly about SB 35. This is a new law that's part of the Permit Streamlining Act. And these are projects that you will not see before you if they are under ministerial approval. And typically ministerial approval means they're approved without discretion. So as long as the application meets particular objective standards and the certain elements of the law, then it will be approved. And the ministerial approval typically happens at the step level. Because you are a discretionary body, typically where you have some discretionary approval for your project. Yeah, there are particular, so if a project is going to be approved under SB 35, it has a very specific requirements for it to be approved. So it has to be located within the city limits. It has to 75% of its perimeter has to adjoin parcels that are already developed for their use. 2/3 of the square footage needs to be for residential uses. It has to be zoned for the residential use. Has to meet the general regulation. And it needs to conform with the basic land use code. And there also needs to be some components of affordable housing. All right, I will talk now about density bonus law. You will see these projects before you, or you will see projects that utilize density bonus law. I think it's relatively common. So basically, the density bonus law is aimed at encouraging developers to include affordable housing units in their projects. And it requires the city to grant density bonuses and other incentives or concessions to certain housing developers. So density bonus just means an increase in the allowable densities. You can build more volume on the property than the zoning code or the general plan might have allowed. So qualifying developments, those are listed on this slide. So depending on the amount and type of affordable housing included in the development, that will determine how much additional density the project's entitled to, and also will determine how much additional incentives or concessions they may want. I won't read through each of these. So incentives or concessions are essentially waivers or of the zoning code, or there's some exception to the general rule. And so those might include something like a reduction in site development standards or a modification of zoning code requirements, or architectural design requirements. Something like reducing the setback or changing square footage requirements, or reducing the amount of parking spaces that are required. So if a development qualifies for the city bonus, they're automatically entitled to a certain number of incentives. And then in exchange for receiving a density bonus or incentive or concession, the applicant does have to agree to maintain the affordability of below very low income units in the project for 55 years. So there is an exchange. The city may be given an additional concession density, but in return, they're required to ensure that those units remain affordable for quite a long period. ADUs are another item that you likely have never seen before you, but I did want to talk about it because I think they're being built all over the place. And you have questions or just want to know a little bit more about them and why you don't see them before you. So essentially, the legislature has declared that among all the other things that they're doing, that allowing ADUs in single family and multi-family zones does provide for additional rental housing, and it is an essential component to addressing California's housing shortage. So approval of ADUs was deemed ministerial in 2003. And starting in 2017, the legislature has begun passing additional laws that have streamlined ADU permit approval and removed certain barriers to constructing ADUs. So again, like because those are ministerial approval, they likely will never be with them. I think the one instance I see when you use before the planning commission is when they're part of a bigger development project. So something where those single family residences and be designed. So the city is required to ministerially approve ADUs as long as they are consistent with state ADU law. And they're required to approve the ADU or do their ADU application within 60 days. If they don't approve it within 60 days, it will be approved. So also recently amended its municipal code to ensure that its ADU ordinance is compliant with state laws, and they should match, although state law. But there are certain requirements in state law. So for example, ADUs, the city has to allow a one-bedroom ADU that are 850 square feet. They have to allow 1,000 square foot ADUs if they have more than one bedroom. And cities can impose larger maximums than that in their own ordinance, but they can't really use that. There are certain parking requirements, so in some certain circumstances, they can't require additional parking for ADUs. There's specific setback requirements, so the state can't require larger setbacks than those that are listed in law. And the same thing with height requirements. The state can't limit the height of an ADU to anything less than what's in the state law. And then last, when it comes to ADUs, the city can't make an owner occupancy requirement. You can, however, impose an owner occupancy requirement on a junior ADU, and they can place limited on whether or not you can use for short term rental.
So there is no parking requirements for your.
There are limits on what you can require. There are times when you could require parking.
Yes, generally the state law says an ADU can have, you can require one parking space. However, you cannot require replacement parking if someone wants to convert, say, a garage or a carport. And they're taking away parking that exists on the site. They're allowed to do that and you can't require them to replace. So not only are you potentially losing 1 or 2 parking spaces for the ADU, you can't require them to add. So in that instance, that ADU would not be required to have a parking space. And then there are also about 4 or 5 kind of radius setbacks established in the law where you cannot require parking for that ADU, and that includes being within a certain distance of a bus stop that has a certain frequency. And there's a few other things like that where you can't require a parking space, but generally it's 1. That's been the establishment since the ADU law as it was fundamentally changed in 2020. I don't know that they changed the parking specifically in any of the updates they've done since then.
That tends to be a pretty big impact for ADUs in a lot of places where parking is very impacted and the city, and people complain and the city like. And then there are 4 types of ADUs in state law that are specifically permitted. So this slide hopefully helps rapidly illustrate what the 4 different types are. But for example, the first one, the JADU interior conversion. So a JADU within an existing or proposed single-family home, and an ADU in an existing or proposed single-family home or an existing accessory structure is going to be permitted if that proposed unit has an independent exterior access and if the side and rear setbacks are sufficient. One detached new construction ADU does not exceed 4 foot side and rear setbacks for a lot of within a proposed or existing single-family dwelling, as long as it complies with the size requirement. And then there's 2 types that are permitted within multifamily dwelling. So the local agency in the city has to allow at least 1 ADU in the existing multifamily dwelling. And they must allow up to 25% of the existing multifamily dwelling with a maximum as long as it meets the height and the setback requirement. And then the last one is also related to multifamily dwellings. So 2 ADUs detached must be permitted or are permitted multifamily dwelling versus as long as it meets the height. And then the city can't charge development impact fees for ADUs that are less than 750 square feet. If it's larger than 750 square feet, then the development impact is charged is proportional to the primary.
Question on ADU for considered or conversion. It's a second floor. Does it need to have its own fire escape?
I don't know specifically about a fire escape, but it does need to have its own separate exterior access. So you would have to build, if in this instance, if it's on the 2nd floor, you would have to build some kind of staircase with a separate outside access. And that would be the same if it was on the 1st floor.
And I just wanted to talk briefly about HCD because it is an acronym that here over and over again. Again, this is the Department of Housing and Community Development. They're responsible for promoting safe, affordable housing in California. They do a lot of things, but so they provide loans and grants to assist with affordable housing. They conduct research to help set statewide housing policy. They're also responsible for certain oversight of manufactured homes. But probably the most critically, one of the things that you'll hear about the most is this, they will proceed the submittal and evaluation of housing elements and regional housing needs allocation. So on that note, all cities are required to prepare and adopt a general plan. And that general plan serves as a long-term roadmap for the growth and development of the city. And one element of the general plan is the housing element. And that the housing element is required to be updated every 8 years. And it requires the city to analyze its existing and projected housing needs and make a statement of goals, policies, quantified objectives, financial resources, and schedule programs for the preservation, improvement, and development of housing. The city, you probably know this, but the city is currently in the process of updating both its general plan. So again, the housing element needs to identify adequate sites for housing for the existing and projected to develop economic segments of the community. And those needs are identified by the regional housing use allocation, which is a number or series of numbers that are given to the city. You have to plan for this many low income, this many very low income, this many moderate, this many moderate. In the future.
And I just add, because it is a point of sometimes miscommunication or confusion, the housing element is to plan for this amount of units, so to provide zoning and adequate sites that you can say we can support this. It is not a mandate upon the city to develop those or to, it may not happen. That's why Jennifer mentioned earlier that not a lot of cities have quote unquote met their RHNA. That's because the city doesn't build housing, developers build housing. So we have to provide a plan and zone that allows housing to be built, but it's not a mandate to build those units and units.
So is there like a specific number that also?
Yes, the 6 cycle, I haven't said this number in a while, I believe it is 4,063, 4163. I can confirm that for you. But that is our 6 cycle number to plan for the next 8 years. That's what
Then that number goes down into, so I think some levels are very low, moderate.
We, in 8 years, we count for it's not.
They do, yes.
So HCD again is responsible for reviewing and essentially approving a city or county housing element. And what they do is basically review that it is substantial compliance. They review the draft to ensure that it's in compliance with housing element law. Again, it needs to be updated every 8 years. There are quite a few consequences with failing to maintain a valid housing element. So you may have heard of what we call the building remedy. This is basically a law that says that if the city doesn't, it doesn't say this expressly, but it's implied that without a valid housing element, cities can't deny certain housing development projects. Basically because the project can't be found inconsistent with the city's general plan. So some jurisdictions have been required to allow projects that don't even meet the city's zoning regulations for the general plan because they have an invalid housing. Potentially cities can also do state funding if they don't have an valid housing element. They could be subject to attorney general challenges or fines, and this is one of those egregious situations. But each city could refer a city to the attorney general if their housing element isn't brought into compliance in a timely manner. And the attorney general will bring an action to enforce compliance, and the court could potentially levy fines of up to $10,000 per month. There are also some potential issues that can arise with communication, or public works projects. So public works projects could be challenged because without valid housing element in the general plan, those projects can't be reviewed for consistency with the general plan. and LAFCO could deny the city's application for annexation. There's the proposed territory, also. Could be reviewed for this. We talked about regional housing and allocation, again, it's a number that's determined by HCD, who then submits it to the regional housing organization, so in some places it would be county, but here it's the.
It's, the San Diego County Council governments. And we did confirm it is 4,163 units for the city cost of 600.
And with my COG takes the number submitted to them by HCD and they divide it up amongst the parties.
For 1,630.
As far as the 6 cycle, it's at the period when there was. When would it be the period started?
2023. Or it's 2024, it ended in.
And then this is my last topic, FP9, it's just kind of a. I don't know why I think I decided it's really interesting within it, but basically it allows ministerial approval for housing development with no more than 2 primary units in a single family zone. And also it allows ministerial approval of a subdivision of a parcel in a single family zone with 2 parcels or both. So basically ordinarily in a single family zone, you can build a single family residence on a parcel. But SB9 would allow ministerial or require ministerial approval of a subdivision of that parcel into 2 parcels, and then 2 primary units on each parcel. So essentially, you could end up with a single family parcel that has 4. And then there are some exceptions. If there's certain environmental constraints. Anti-displacement constraints, even if there were people living there, under certain circumstances. The approval for the displacement of people, I think I wanted it to change. The short of it is that there is a law that would require cities to approve split a single family parcel, and then we build it to home times. Oh, I'm sorry, but I did just want to highlight a couple of relatively recent laws. Most of these went into effect on January 1st. I'm not going to get into too much detail, but really the purpose is to just demonstrate how often and frequently these housing laws change. Because all of these were effective January 1st, 2024, and still this is not all of them. So, for example, SB 684 requires ministerial approval of certain projects of up to 10 housing units. If that's on a parcel that's 5 acres or less. Again, there are certain requirements that have to be met. There is AB 1449, which created a CEQA exemption for certain affordable housing projects. SB 713 updated the state density bonus law to clarify that local governments can't apply a development standard if the standard would have the effect of precluding the construction of development. AB 821 requires zoning updates based on the general plan, so it includes requirements that has received the development application for a project, provided that the project is accepted today. And during the time of the local zoning ordinance, it the general plan due to the amendment to the general plan. So basically just highlights the fact that when the city does amend its general plan, it's really important to also update its zoning plan to make sure that AB 1332 streamline approval of certain pre-approved ADU plans. So these would be a city will pre-approve a plan for ADU and constituents and counties. I don't know if that was said, I guess, or something like that, and use it for their own project. And that would be.
I had a few. So basically, AB 1332 is like a better plan for what we do. I think this follows that what it does.
The one for requiring the programming.
No, it's just that there's just been like three other things.
So we don't have any plans currently in place. I'm not sure if it's AB 1332 or another law, as Jennifer mentioned, there's many of them, but I am aware that there is one that requires us to have a program in place by January 1st, 2025, is my understanding. Don't quote me on it, but I'm fairly certain. And so that's something that we're working towards, and we have to have a program to allow people to submit plans, and then obviously some way established for people to use them. But right now, we don't have any AU reapproved plans.
And then, as far as the arena numbers to determine, how does it come up with it?
The state has methodology for their, so there's kind of two different allocations. There's the state allocates to the local transportation and regional authorities. In our case, we're part of AMDAG, but we're not a part of AMDAG for the arena. As we mentioned earlier, San Bernardino County COG gets our own arena number. So the state has a methodology for how they allocate those numbers, let's say to AMDAG and ABAG, which is the San Jose, Santa Clara area, and COG, and their methodologies have to do with you know, I believe in this 6th cycle, they were focused on transportation and access to public transit and those types of things. So they establish through kind of however they allocate out their methodology of how many units that they want us to build and divide it across the state. And then the individual AMBAGs, and in our case COG, does their own methodology for how they allocate to the individual jurisdictions. So COG's methodology, they work with staff, but at the end of the day, the COG board adopts a methodology to divide it between Hollister, San Juan Bautista, and San Benito County, the overall 5,005 units that the region got. So all of those adopted methodologies are available on those sites. I don't have exactly details, but I know that a big focus of the 6th cycle was putting housing towards and close to public transit. And I know that when the state tells COG and tells AMBAG, here's your total number, allocate to your jurisdictions, the state has to approve the methodology that they use as well. So they have a second level of review on the individual allocations before. So they can say about, you didn't pick the right jurisdiction, they need more or less because of our methodology kind of guidelines that we use. Complicated process, yeah.
And then as far as the 5th cycle,
We met and exceeded our above moderate our market rate units. We did not meet any of our low, very low or moderate income units. But and it doesn't matter the state, because meeting all 4 categories is what matters, but we did exceed the total remits in the housing that was built, but not in the individual categories.
just so I get a better understanding, so in our 6th cycle, we have 4,163 homes that have to be built. And if I heard correctly, the penalty if we don't is $10,000 per month.
No, so there is a penalty, that the courts could apply of $10,000 per month if you don't have a valid housing element. And I mean, from what I've seen, that's only in those egregious circumstances where there are agencies who are intentionally not adopting an housing element, or intentionally not including all of the elements that are required, that sort of thing. RENA that doesn't apply to you when you're not including first.
And then if you did get penalty, then the city and everything like that.
Yeah. I would probably, I don't think you're a finance person here, but and then that money is put into a fund a state fund that's used to facilitate affordable housing. And I've been consulted with.
Sorry. for all that. And then. Earlier in your presentation that you had. So, remote capabilities for city council is acceptable and not the commission. What the reasoning behind that?
No, I don't. There was a bill, this year that was intended to allow commissioners to attend remotely, and for whatever reason it didn't pass. I don't know. Just didn't have a political will around, but I don't know whether that's.
And that's all the questions I have. I think, so we move on to item. Eight.
I think let's,
Or have something. Really? So, planning commission. Well, welcome, your first meeting. Look forward to working with you. Mr. Cohen.
Actually, I do have one question for staff. Now that Commissioner Henderson is no longer with us, when would it be appropriate to either nominate or promote vice chair?
Yes.
Or to chair, and then how they selection of the leaders.
I've been having this conversation and question because there was a time when we were waiting for 5, and then we went down to 2 for a second, and then 3, so we've had a change in numbers, but I can talk with our city clerk and with our city attorney, and we can probably do that next meeting. It's in your bylaws, you do it every January, but it doesn't really clearly say, and I know we just amended them, but I don't know how the process for you, so I didn't propose an amendment, but it doesn't really say what happens when you lose membership, so. We can have a discussion among staff, and we can either bring it back and have an election appointment of chair and vice chair at our next meeting, or we can have more information on what the process should look like.
Thank you for the presentation tonight. They're very helpful. Is it possible that we can do an annual Brown Act tutorial?
Yeah, I would have liked to leave, so there was a full commission, but again, it's like. Everyone should have an information.
Awesome, and then, and then, possibly do an annual like bylaw review, like a study session.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Those are the only two recommendations I have. I guess we move on to item number 2, number 7, reading report.
Thank you. I do have just a few things that I'd like to announce slash ask. So the first thing I'll announce is at the August 6th city council meeting, the city council did adopt the second reading, so formal full adoption of our inclusionary housing ordinance. So that's exciting news for the city, to help us have some affordable housing required in residential development. So that'll go into effect in 30 days from the adoption, so in the next week and a half or so. Which will be, is a good step forward in helping us to meet our rate in the 6th cycle. The next thing, just as you may have noticed, we are officially using eScribe in the agenda management software, so we'll be providing the planning commission everything electronically through eScribe. However, because you guys are reviewing plan sets and complicated project applications. I did want to ask, and I can do a roll call, or if you want to email me later, if you want to think about it. Who would like to still receive a hard copy, full-size plan set when we do that development project application? We can continue to ask that and provide that to you, so you can review 24 by 36 plans. So I would be happy to just show of hands if you want a hard copy. And I'll ask Commissioner Mason in the offline.
What's the cost of getting that?
The cost of getting plans is, the applicant will provide them at our request. And it depends on the size and who they use for printing. The city does have a copy fee for that size of plans. I believe it's about $7 per page. But we're probably a little bit more expensive than a print shop that the applicants have access to. And then I would just like to announce that the city's website was just recently updated, so. We're working through a few kinks there, but it is newly redesigned. That's been something staff's been working on for quite some time now. So that's exciting. I know we just told you how to navigate to describe in the new agenda, and then the website changed, so that navigation has changed, but. If the agenda is still published there as well, but that's a new thing for the whole city. And then finally, I just wanted to give a brief update on our general plan update, as well as our housing element update. The general plan was published for public review, is out. The EIR comment deadline did end on Friday, so staff and our consultants are working on finalizing the final EIR, and that document is something that will be coming back before the planning commission, likely at the October meeting. So I would encourage you, it is a long document, especially the EIR, to look at that. And as a reminder, and for our new commissioners, that is available at hollister2040.org, which is our general plan website. And you can take a look at the general plan. We also have the climate action plan, the ag preservation program, and then of course the EIR that goes with all of those 3 documents. So that's something that's exciting moving forward, and we'll be back by the planning commission soon. And then for the 6 cycle housing element, we talked a little bit about generally, but we are in the middle of it, amending it based on state comments that were given to us earlier in the summer. We just got back the draft, the staff earlier this week, so we're reviewing the revised draft, and that'll get published, and then we hope to go back to the state soon. And hopefully have no comments, but they may have additional comments, but we're working our way through that state review process. That's something.
Thank you. And can we go back to the first report? I just had one more question. You mentioned that there were a few jurisdictions that exceeded the minimum amounts. Do you know off the top of your level?
I think it's 27 out of like 100. Yeah, it's 20 something. Yeah.
Is there any local? Yeah.
The Sea Greenfield is the one I'm aware of, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 8. Going to, I'll stick around on that. Mr. Chair, I'd like to have a motion on the floor. I'll second. All those in favor, signify by saying aye. 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 3-0. And this meeting is now adjourned at 7:19. Thank you, everybody.